I'm glad to
It
have
was a
you here.
time of simple
Follow my
joys,
story until the
when
end
the
and
days
comment the city
stretched
you're
out
watching
like
from.
endless
I never
ribbons of
thought a
gold.
simple promise over coffee would end
I'm
up
just so
costing me my
grateful for
family.
everything in my
But that's
life.
exactly what
The
happened when
little
my son
moments, the
Christopher
big
looked across
moments,
the
all
table
of
at
it.
me, stirred his coffee nervously, and said the words that would change everything. Mom, you shouldn't be living alone. The condo's too quiet since Dad passed. You'd be happier with us. The kids would love having you there. Richard had only been gone for 6 months. My wedding ring still felt heavy on my finger, a constant reminder of the 43 years we'd spent building a life together. The diner on Maple Street was our regular spot. Richard used to order the same omelet every Sunday. Now I sat alone across from my only son, a widow at 68, trying to navigate a world that suddenly felt too large. Christopher reached for my hand. His eyes were tired, but kind. He looked so much like his father, sometimes it hurt to look at him. We could renovate, add a second floor for the kids. You could have your own space. It would be your home too, Mom. I sipped my tea, considering his words. The condo had grown quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that follows you from room to room like an unwelcome shadow. I'd need to sell the condo, I said finally. Christopher nodded, a hint of something, relief, crossing his face. Whatever you get for it could go toward the renovation. We could build something really nice. How much would it cost? I asked. Probably around $180,000 for what we want to do. He paused. I know it's a lot. My condo would sell for just over $300,000 in the current market. I'd been a tax accountant for 36 years before retirement. Numbers were my language, my comfort zone. I'd always been careful with money. It was how Richard and I had built our nest egg, despite never having extravagant salaries. I could contribute that much, I said slowly. If this is really going to be my home too. Christopher's face lit up. He squeezed my hand. Of course it will, Mom. This will be your home too. We're family. I told myself love was better than a lawyer. I told myself family meant something. I told myself that at my age I needed to be practical about the future. 3 weeks later, I wrote a check for $180,000 directly to the contractor. I didn't ask for paperwork. I didn't insist on having my name on the deed. Christopher was my son, my only child. I trusted him completely. It took 4 months to complete the renovation. Christopher and Julia's modest 2-bedroom home transformed into a spacious 2-story with 4 bedrooms, a renovated kitchen with granite countertops, hardwood floors, and a nursery for their youngest, Emma. They insisted I take the downstairs guest room with the attached bath, the one overlooking the backyard garden I would soon plant. Moving day arrived on a bright September morning. I brought only what would fit comfortably in my new space: a queen bed, my reading chair, some clothes, and a few precious mementos. The rest I either sold or put in storage. This is going to be wonderful, Julia said, helping me arrange family photos on the dresser. Her smile seemed genuine then. The kids are over the moon having Grandma here. 8-year-old Tyler and 5-year-old Emma swarmed around me, asking where I'd put the cookie jar and if I'd help with their homework after school. I felt needed. I felt part of something again. That night I lay in my new bed listening to the unfamiliar creaks of the house. The distant sound of Christopher and Julia talking upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator I'd helped pay for. I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this was exactly what I needed. Maybe this would be my second chance at family. I had no idea I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. The first 3 months were everything I'd hoped for. I settled into a comfortable routine, helping get the children ready for school in the mornings, tending to my small garden plot, preparing dinner before Julia came home from her marketing job. Christopher worked long hours at his architectural firm, but always made time to check in with me. "You've been a godsend, Mom," he said one evening as I folded laundry. I don't know how we managed before. I felt useful, valued. The emptiness that had followed me since Richard's death began to recede. Then came the first small change. I returned from grocery shopping one Tuesday to find the kitchen completely reorganized. My tea canisters, the ones I'd carefully labeled and placed near the stove, were now on the highest shelf, nearly out of reach for my 5'3" frame. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," Julia said when I mentioned it. I needed more counter space for my new juicer. It seemed reasonable enough. It was her kitchen after all. I said nothing and used a step stool to reach my tea. A week later, I noticed the framed family photos I'd placed in the hallway were gone. In their place hung modern art prints, abstract splashes of color that meant nothing to me. "Where are the family pictures?" I asked Julia as she rushed through the living room with her laptop bag. "They didn't really match the aesthetic," she said without stopping. "I put them in the hall closet. You can keep them in your room if you want." Again, I told myself it was nothing, just a young woman wanting her house to look a certain way. I retrieved the photos and placed them on my dresser, feeling a strange sense of being edited out of the common spaces. The pattern continued. My gardening books disappeared from the living room shelves. The Afghan I'd crocheted, the one Tyler loved to wrap around himself during movie nights, was replaced by a sleek throw that matched the new couch pillows. My special mug, the one Richard had given me on our 30th anniversary, vanished from the cabinet only to reappear in a box in the garage labeled donations. I rescued it without comment. Each incident seemed too small to make a fuss about. Then came the family dinner. Christopher's boss and his wife were coming, along with 2 potential clients. Julia spent the entire day preparing, turning down my offers to help. "I've got it under control," she insisted. "Maybe you could take the kids to the park for a while?" When I returned with Tyler and Emma, the table was set beautifully, with 5 place settings. "Am I not joining you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Julia barely glanced up from her meticulous arrangement of the centerpiece. "Oh, I thought it would be better to keep it intimate. Business talk, you know. You wouldn't be interested. I've set up a tray for you in your room." That night I ate alone while listening to the laughter from the dining room. Tyler snuck in halfway through, crawling onto my lap. "Why aren't you eating with us, Grandma?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Sometimes grown-ups have boring business dinners. This is much nicer, isn't it? Just us?" But as I tucked him back into bed later, a weight settled in my chest. For the first time, I wondered if I'd made a mistake moving in. That night, I dreamed of my old condo. The silence that had once seemed oppressive, now feeling like something else entirely. Freedom. The incident at the bathroom door was what truly opened my eyes. I'd been living with Christopher and Julia for 6 months when I overheard her on the phone one afternoon. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but as I passed the master bedroom with a basket of folded towels, her sharp tone made me pause. "It's like having a tenant who never pays rent," she was saying, her voice low but clear. "I can't even decorate my own house without considering her opinions." A pause. "I know, Mom. Christopher says we owe her because of the renovation money, but honestly, I didn't think she'd be here all the time. I thought maybe weekends or something." My hands tightened on the laundry basket. I stood frozen, the weight of the towels suddenly unbearable. "No, I haven't said anything directly." Christopher would flip out. "You know how he is about his mom." Another pause. "Yeah, well, that might change soon. We've got some options to consider." I forced myself to move away before she could discover me. In my room, I set the basket down with trembling hands and sat heavily on the edge of my bed. The conversation replayed in my mind like a record with a scratch, stopping and starting on the most painful parts. A tenant who never pays rent. I'd contributed $180,000 to this house, over half the value of my condo. I'd been cooking, cleaning, providing free childcare. How was that not paying my way? That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, cataloging other moments that suddenly took on new meaning. Julia's tight smiles when I suggested dinner ideas, the way certain conversations stopped when I entered a room, Christopher's increasing late nights at the office. The next morning, I waited until both Christopher and Julia had left for work and the children were at school. It wasn't something I'd ever thought I'd do, but I needed answers. I went to Christopher's home office and turned on his computer. The password was Tyler's birthday, the same one he'd used since college. Some habits never change. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found it. An email chain between Christopher and Julia from 2 weeks earlier. "We need to talk about the mom situation," Julia had written. "It's been 6 months and I feel like we're never going to have our privacy back." Christopher's response was shorter. "What do you want me to do? We can't just kick her out." "I'm not saying that. But maybe we could suggest she find her own place nearby. We could help with the down payment. Use some of her renovation contribution. My renovation contribution. The money I'd given them. The money that was supposed to secure my place in this home." I scrolled further and found something worse. Bank statements. Julia's personal account showed multiple large withdrawals at casinos over the past year. Thousands of dollars. Far more than I knew they could afford on their salaries. There it was, the truth hidden beneath the surface. Julia had a gambling problem, one serious enough to put a significant strain on their finances. Suddenly her resentment made more sense. They needed money, and I represented both a solution and a complication. I kept searching, sick to my stomach but unable to stop. In a folder labeled Financial Options, I found draft paperwork for a home equity loan, using the house I'd helped pay for as collateral. My name was nowhere on any of the documents. The front door slammed, startling me so badly I nearly fell out of the chair. I quickly closed everything and shut down the computer, my heart pounding. "Grandma, are you home?" It was Emma, back early from kindergarten. She'd been feeling sick that morning. I took a deep breath, wiped my damp palms on my slacks, and went to take care of my granddaughter. But as I made her soup and felt her forehead, my mind was racing. That evening, after the children were in bed, I drove to an electronics store and bought something I never thought I'd need. A small recording device. The kind that could fit in a pocket or under a table edge. The kind that could tell me what was said when I wasn't in the room. The clerk's curious glance made my cheeks burn with shame, but I managed to smile. "My memory isn't what it used to be," I explained. "Need to record my grocery lists." Back at the house, I slipped the device under the dining room table where Christopher and Julia often talked after the children were asleep. I felt like a criminal in my own home. No, not my home. Their home. That distinction was becoming increasingly clear. I lay awake that night, wondering what had happened to the family I thought I knew. Wondering what would happen next. Wondering if I should confront them or wait for more evidence. Morning brought no clarity. Only the heavy weight of betrayal and the growing suspicion that I needed to protect myself before it was too late. The new security system was installed on a Tuesday. I returned from taking Emma to her ballet class to find a technician mounting a keypad by the front door. Christopher was standing in the foyer directing the installation. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down my purse. Christopher barely looked up from the paperwork he was signing. "Just upgrading our security. There's been some break-ins in the neighborhood." "That's a good idea," I said, though I hadn't heard about any break-ins. "How does it work?" "Simple," the technician explained. "Each family member gets their own code. You punch it in to arm or disarm the system." I waited for Christopher to tell me my code. He didn't. That night, after dropping off some donations at the church rummage sale, I returned to find the house locked and the alarm armed. I rang the doorbell, waiting in the chilly autumn air. 5 minutes passed before Julia opened the door, her expression mildly annoyed. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Forgot you were out." "I don't have a code for the new system," I explained, stepping inside. "Oh, right." She glanced toward the stairs. "Christopher forgot to set you up. He'll do it tomorrow." Tomorrow came and went. So did the next day. When I finally reminded Christopher about the code, he looked momentarily confused. "Right. I forgot to add your code," he said. "I'll take care of it tonight." But he didn't, and the pattern continued. I would return from an errand to find myself locked out, forced to ring the doorbell and wait for someone to let me in. Sometimes it was quick. Other times, I stood on the porch for 20 minutes or more, increasingly aware of my tenuous position in this household. The security system was just the beginning of my isolation. Julia began scheduling the children's activities during times I typically spent with them. My Saturday morning pancake tradition with Tyler disappeared when Julia enrolled him in a soccer program that met at 8 a.m. Emma's bedtime stories, once my special time with her, were taken over by Julia, who insisted on more consistent routines. "The parenting books say consistency is key," she explained when I asked about the change. Her tone implied I wouldn't understand such modern approaches. My movements around the house became increasingly restricted. Julia established quiet hours during which I couldn't vacuum or use the washer and dryer. The kitchen was off limits after 8 p.m. because Julia was trying to curb late-night snacking. The living room television was usually occupied by Christopher's sports or Julia's reality shows, leaving me to retreat to my bedroom most evenings. Even my small garden wasn't safe. I came home one day to find half of my vegetables pulled up, replaced by ornamental grasses. "They're more low maintenance," Julia explained with a tight smile, "and they match the landscaping better." I said nothing. What could I say? It wasn't my garden. It wasn't my house. Despite my $180,000 contribution, I had no legal claim to anything. That realization hit me hard one sleepless night. I'd been a tax accountant for nearly 4 decades. I'd advised countless clients on protecting their assets, on getting everything in writing, yet I'd handed over a substantial sum to my own son without any documentation, without any protection. The next morning, I made a decision. I began researching apartments in the area, looking for something small but comfortable, something with a security system I could control, something that would be mine. I found it 2 weeks later, a modest 1-bedroom on Kaufman Street, in a quiet building with good security and a small community garden in the back. The rent was reasonable. I could afford it with my Social Security and the income from my investments. I signed a 6-month lease and paid the first and last month's rent, all without telling Christopher or Julia. It was my backup plan, my safety net, my secret. I continued to live in their house, increasingly like a ghost. I folded my clothes in silence. I ate meals alone in my room. I watched Julia rearrange my belongings without asking, watched Christopher avoid my eyes when I tried to talk to him about the future. One evening I attempted a direct conversation. "Christopher, is everything okay between us?" I asked as he paid bills at the kitchen table. He barely looked up. "Everything's fine, Mom. Why?" "Things feel different. Like maybe you and Julia regret having me here." He sighed, putting down his pen. "It's just a busy time. Julia's stressed with work. We're all adjusting. Adjusting." That was the word he used when I asked why my name had been removed from the emergency contact forms at the children's school. When I found my gardening tools moved to the far corner of the garage. When the family dinner I'd planned for my birthday was suddenly rescheduled due to a work event that I later learned never existed. We were adjusting me right out of their lives. The security code incident was the final straw. After being locked out for the 5th time in 2 weeks, standing in the rain for 20 minutes while Julia ignored my texts, I finally confronted Christopher. I need my own security code, I said firmly. This isn't working. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. About that, Julia and I have been talking. We think we need clearer boundaries. Boundaries? I echoed. It's not personal, Mom, but we need some privacy. The security system, it helps us keep track of who's coming and going. Not personal? They were monitoring my movements like I was a teenager breaking curfew, and it wasn't personal? That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, finally accepting what I'd suspected for weeks. I wasn't welcome here anymore. This had never been my home. I had been useful. For childcare, for household help, for financial contribution. But now I was an inconvenience. The next morning I transferred the security deposit to the Kaufman Street apartment and arranged to have utilities connected. I didn't tell Christopher or Julia. I didn't tell anyone. It would be my safety net, my escape plan. I just didn't realize how soon I'd need it. I never thought a sticky note on a tea tray would end up being the final nail in the coffin of my family. There it was, balanced on the edge like it belonged there. A white square of paper, not even folded. Neat, sterile handwriting in Julia's distinctive slant. Sorry, Teresa. No room anymore. Christopher's parents need your space. I stood in the kitchen I had helped pay for, the tea canisters I'd labeled still on the highest shelf, and felt my world tilt on its axis. No signature, no explanation, just that message, cold as the granite countertops I'd financed. I didn't scream. I didn't even sit down. I folded the note in half, then in half again, and slipped it into the pocket of my robe like it was a receipt I might one day return for a refund on my broken heart. Christopher's parents, Robert and Margaret Bailey, lived in Arizona. They visited twice a year at most. The last I'd heard, they were planning a cruise to Alaska this summer. There was no reason they would suddenly need my space. This was an excuse, a flimsy pretext to remove me from their lives. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, a physical ache behind my ribs, but alongside it grew something harder, something colder, resolve. I walked slowly to my bedroom, the guest room, technically, the one that overlooked the garden that was no longer mine. I pulled the suitcase from the closet and began to pack. Medications, phone charger, 2 pairs of slacks, 3 blouses, my comfortable shoes. I added the wool blanket Richard had bought in Vermont on our 20th anniversary trip, and 3 framed photos. One of Christopher at his college graduation, one of Christopher and Julia on their wedding day, and one of all of us at the lake before everything rotted. I zipped the suitcase, didn't double-check, didn't second-guess. There would be time later to come back for the rest, or perhaps I wouldn't come back at all. Some things weren't worth retrieving. My coat hung by the front door, same place it always was. I stared at it for a long time. A ridiculous thought hit me. It had just been dry cleaned. I remembered because Julia had complained about the bill. Still, it waited there like it knew it would be worn again, like it had been prepared for this departure. I put it on, feeling the familiar weight settle around my shoulders. I stood at the threshold, one hand on the doorknob, the other holding the handle of my small blue suitcase. I didn't cry. I simply turned the lock, stepped outside, and closed the door behind me. I didn't look back. 20 minutes later, I stood in the living room of my backup apartment on Kaufman Street. The space was small but clean, with morning light streaming through the east-facing windows. I had arranged for basic furniture, a bed, a couch, a small dining table with 2 chairs. The kitchen was tiny but functional. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was mine. I unpacked my meager belongings, placing the framed photos on the bedside table. I made the bed with fresh linens I'd purchased the week before. I hung my clothes in the closet, arranging them by color as I always had. These small, ordinary acts felt like rebellion. Each item I placed, each decision I made, was mine alone. No one could move my tea canisters here. No one could replace my family photos with abstract art. No one could lock me out. I sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My son, my only child, had allowed his wife to push me out of their home, the home I had helped create. They had taken my money, my time, my love, and then discarded me when I became inconvenient. The note in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. I took it out, unfolded it, read it again. Sorry, Teresa, no room anymore. Christopher's parents need your space. Such a simple sentence to end years of trust. I didn't know then that this wasn't the end of their betrayal. I didn't know that even as I sat in my bare apartment, they were already planning the next steps in their scheme, steps that would have stripped me of far more than my dignity. I didn't know that I would soon discover the true extent of their deception, or that I would find strength I never knew I possessed. What I did know, sitting in that quiet apartment with nothing but a suitcase and my wounded pride, was that I wasn't going to fade away quietly. I had spent my life being practical, being responsible, being the one who smoothed over conflicts and made sacrifices. Perhaps it was time for a different approach. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in nearly a decade. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Patricia Morgan's office. This is Teresa Bailey, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'd like to make an appointment with Patricia as soon as possible. May I ask what this is regarding, Mrs. Bailey? I looked at the note in my hand, at the photos of my family on the bedside table, at the small blue suitcase that contained the remnants of my life with them. Legal advice, I said simply, regarding property rights and fraud. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of purpose. They thought I would disappear. They thought I would accept their dismissal with the same quiet grace with which I had accepted everything else. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The morning light streamed through the blinds of my Kaufman Street apartment, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. I'd been here 3 days, and the silence still felt strange. Not oppressive like after Richard died, but expectant, waiting. I sipped my tea from a new mug, nothing like the special one Richard had given me, but it would do. The apartment was small but functional, a combined living and dining area, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, a bedroom with a window facing east, and a bathroom with decent water pressure. It wasn't home yet, but it was mine. No one could take it from me. I'd spent the first day crying, finally allowing myself the tears I'd held back when I found Julia's note. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the $180,000 I'd given them, for the garden I'd planted and the relationships I'd tended just as carefully. I cried until my eyes burned and my throat ached, and then I stopped. Tears wouldn't get me answers. Tears wouldn't get me justice. On the second day, I began to plan. I pulled out my old leather planner, the one I'd used throughout my career as a tax accountant. Inside were business cards, notes, and contact information for people I hadn't spoken to in years, including Patricia Morgan. Patricia and I had served together on the City Audit Committee a decade ago. She was a lawyer with a reputation for being thorough, discreet, and relentless when necessary. She'd helped me navigate the legal aspects of Richard's estate after he passed. If anyone could help me now, it would be Patricia. Her office hadn't changed much, still on the 2nd floor of that brick building downtown, still featuring the no-nonsense receptionist and the scent of old law books mixed with fresh coffee. What had changed was Patricia herself. Her hair had gone completely silver, and reading glasses now hung from a chain around her neck. but her eyes were the same, sharp, assessing, missing nothing. "Teresa," she said, not standing as I entered. She never did. "You don't usually call unless something's on fire." I placed the folder I'd brought on her desk without a word. The deed to the house, payment records, bank statements, and finally, Julia's note. Patricia read in silence. Halfway through, she stopped to ask one question. "You still have access to the property?" "No," I answered. "They changed the locks." She blinked once, then continued reading. Patricia had always been the kind of woman people underestimated. She wore neutral sweaters, sensible shoes, and glasses that made her look like a librarian. But when she spoke in court, men twice her size and half her intelligence stumbled over their arguments trying to keep up. When she closed the folder, she gave me the kind of nod you'd give someone who just brought a fully sharpened knife to a gunfight. Not impressed exactly, but acknowledging the potential. "They have no legal standing," she said simply. "No lease, no co-ownership, no transfer of rights. They're not even squatters. They're unauthorized occupants of your property." I blinked, confused. "My property? Christopher and Julia own the house. I just contributed to the renovation." Patricia tilted her head, studying me with new interest. "Is that what they told you? Who signed the mortgage documents, Teresa?" "Christopher, I assume. It's his house." "Did you ever see the closing documents? The deed? The mortgage agreement?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I trusted him. He's my son." Patricia turned to her computer and began typing. "Let's look at the county property records, shall we?" A few minutes later, she turned the monitor toward me. There on the screen was the property record for 1418 Oakwood Drive, Christopher and Julia's address. Owner, Teresa M. Bailey. "This can't be right," I whispered, leaning closer. I didn't. "According to these records, you are the sole owner of the property," Patricia said. "The mortgage is in your name. The property taxes are paid from your account. As far as the county is concerned, that house belongs to you and you alone." My mind raced back to the closing, the mountain of paperwork Christopher had asked me to sign. "For the renovation loan," he'd said. I'd signed without reading carefully, trusting him completely. "But why would he—" I started, then stopped as understanding dawned. Christopher had put the house in my name, likely because his credit wasn't good enough to secure the mortgage on his own. I had better credit, more assets, a longer financial history. With me as the owner, they got a better interest rate, lower payments, more favorable terms. "They've been living in my house," I said slowly, "the house I own, and they locked me out." Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, a small, satisfied curving of lips. "Yes, they have. And now we have options." Those options, as Patricia outlined them, ranged from a formal eviction proceeding to a more aggressive approach involving police intervention for illegal lockout. "Or," she added, her eyes gleaming with something that might have been amusement, "we could sell it right out from under them and let them find out when the moving truck pulls up." I stared out the window at a man walking his dog, thinking how calm the world looks when you decide you're done begging people to do the right thing. "How quickly could we sell it?" I asked quietly. "Fast, if you're not picky about the price. I know a broker who specializes in quick, quiet sales. No open houses, no nosy neighbors, just paperwork and wire transfers." "I want the house sold," I said. "Clean, legal, and fast." Patricia smiled. "Now we're talking." Back at my backup apartment, I began to organize. I'd spent 36 years keeping meticulous records for clients, tracking every penny, documenting every transaction. Now I would use those same skills to protect myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. Christopher and Julia clearly thought I was just a confused old woman, easily manipulated, easily dismissed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They always assumed I had no clue about technology. Julia once laughed when I asked how to stream a movie, saying, "Don't worry, tech stuff's not for your generation." She didn't know I'd managed digital tax records for small businesses for decades. Some of my clients ran restaurants with 10 employees and terrible bookkeeping. Others ran operations spanning 3 states with quarterly audits. I'd kept copies of everything, backed up meticulously, secured properly. Now I would apply that same thoroughness to documenting their betrayal. The Kaufman apartment was small, but it had good light, a clean desk, and most importantly, a locked filing cabinet they'd never seen. Inside was everything I needed: the original deed, mortgage documents, tax statements, utility bills, all in my name. I checked the county assessor's website. The title was clean, my name only. I pulled up the property tax statements. Every payment had been made from my account. I checked utilities, homeowner's insurance, maintenance fees, all in my name, all tracked, all documented. No matter what story they'd built in their heads, on paper, I was the sole owner. The house was mine. It had always been mine. I sat back and breathed for the first time in days. They had taken my dignity, my trust, my place in the family, but they couldn't take what was legally mine. Not anymore. I hadn't planned to go through the storage bin in the hall closet, but something pulled me toward it. The same way you check the back seat of your car, even when you know it's empty. It was an old plastic tub labeled Electronics, Maisk. I hadn't touched it since the move. Inside were Richard's old flip phones, some outdated chargers, and a tiny silver voice recorder I used to keep in my work bag for client meetings. I'd forgotten all about it. On a whim, I plugged it in and let it charge while I made dinner. Hours later, long after the dishes were dry and more emails sent to Patricia, I sat down and pressed play. The first few files were business notes, dull dictations from a woman who hadn't yet learned how invisible she would become. Then, almost an hour in, came a recording I didn't recognize. The audio was faint, but I heard Julia's voice unmistakably sharp and low, speaking to someone on speakerphone. "Once she's gone, we'll transfer it," she was saying. "My mom says we can file under caretaker terms if she signs anything at the doctor's office." A pause. Then Julia again, sounding bored. "She's getting old. We'll handle it. Christopher can sign for her if needed. She won't even know." That last sentence hung in the room like a draft you didn't realize was coming until the cold hit your spine. She said it so casually, like she was talking about returning a pair of shoes. I replayed it twice to be sure. It wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't just neglect or thoughtlessness. It was a plan. They weren't just trying to edge me out. They were waiting for me to become confused, compliant, too tired to notice the paperwork. Except I'd already noticed. I labeled the file, saved it to my laptop, and made 2 backup copies. For a long time, I thought the worst part of aging would be the loneliness. I never imagined it would be watching your own child prepare to steal your name off a deed before you were even dead. But now I had something they didn't know I had. Their voices, their intentions, their plan. I spent the next day going deeper. I logged into my bank accounts, downloading every statement from the past 3 years. I went through each one methodically, highlighting every withdrawal I'd made to cover mortgage payments on a house I didn't know I owned. When I found the transaction that made my blood run cold, I nearly missed it. A $25,000 transfer from my checking account 6 months ago, labeled consulting fee. The recipient, Robert Wright. Robert Wright was Julia's father. A retired electrician with no consulting background whatsoever. No reason to be receiving $25,000 from my account. I called the bank immediately, asking about the transfer authorization. The transaction was approved via our online portal, the representative told me. authorized with your password and security questions." "Can you tell me what device was used?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "The login came from an IP address associated with previous logins from your son's home network. They had accessed my account, used my password, transferred my money to Julia's father. The theft wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial. It was criminal." I hung up and sat very still, letting the full implications sink in. They had been planning this for months, maybe longer. The note, the changed locks, those weren't impulsive actions. They were the next steps in a calculated plan to take everything I had. And they almost succeeded. Almost. That evening, I received an email that confirmed my worst fears. It was from Christopher, but I wasn't the intended recipient. I'd been CC'd by mistake. "Make sure Mom can't access the house before Tuesday," he wrote to Julia. "The realtor will be doing a walkthrough. We'll say the papers are in progress." The subject line read, "Prep for staging." He wasn't just pretending to own my house. He was trying to sell it. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, but in my mind, I could see the locks clicking shut, the lights turning on in my house, and two people parading around inside a life they thought they had won. They had underestimated me. That was their mistake. Now it was time to let the consequences catch up. Patricia's office felt different this time, less intimidating, more like a war room where strategies were formed and battles planned. Michael Harrison, the real estate broker she'd mentioned, was waiting for us. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the easy confidence of someone who'd seen it all in the housing market. "The situation is unusual," he admitted after Patricia explained the basics, "but not complicated from a legal standpoint. You own the house outright, Mrs. Bailey. Your name is on the deed. You have every right to sell it if you wish." "Without notifying my son?" I asked. "We would be following all legal protocols," Patricia interjected. "We're not required to keep unauthorized occupants informed of the owner's decisions regarding the property." Unauthorized occupants, my son and his wife, the people who had locked me out of my own home, the people who were planning to sell it out from under me. "How quickly could it be done?" I asked. Michael glanced at Patricia before answering. "With a motivated cash buyer, we could close in as little as a week. No inspections, no financing contingencies, just paperwork and signatures." "And you know such a buyer?" He nodded. "Daniel Greenberg, local developer who specializes in converting larger homes into duplexes. He's been looking for properties in that neighborhood for months." I tried to imagine my house, my garden, my kitchen, the rooms where my grandchildren slept, divided and remodeled for strangers. Then I remembered Julia's note. No room anymore. I remembered being locked out in the rain. I remembered the recording of her planning to take control of my assets when I became confused. "Set up the meeting," I said. As we discussed logistics, a letter arrived by certified mail at my apartment. No return address, just an official-looking envelope that made my stomach clench before I even opened it. Inside was a letter from a local paralegal firm, the kind that advertises low-cost estate planning and eviction notices on bus stop benches. It began politely enough. "Dear Mrs. Bailey, regarding the recent transition of residents." But the real message came 2 paragraphs down. "As you voluntarily vacated the premises and relinquished your right of occupancy, the current residents are proceeding with the lawful transfer of property ownership. Deed transfer documents have been submitted." They'd filed paperwork, filed it under the assumption that my silence meant surrender. I read it twice, then flipped to the copy of the gift deed they'd attached. The signatures were awkward. Julia's handwriting was neat and forced. Christopher's was blocky and rushed. My name was scrawled across the line in a shaky loop that didn't even match the way I write the letter B. They had forged my signature. I sat very still. Then I stood up and pulled my file drawer open. I took out an envelope I'd kept for emergencies, one that contained every known variation of my legal signature from the past decade. Tax returns, bank forms, even my passport renewal. I laid them out beside the forgery. No amount of photocopying or justification would make that signature pass scrutiny. I brought the forged document to Patricia the next morning. She examined it with the careful attention of a jeweler inspecting a suspicious diamond. "This isn't even a good forgery," she said finally. "And the notary? Claudia Jenkins? I checked the state registry. There is no notary by that name in this county or any adjacent one. What does this mean for us? It means they've moved from unethical to illegal, forging documents, fake notary stamps. These are criminal offenses, Teresa, not just civil matters." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb the escalation. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man I thought I knew, had committed fraud, had stolen from me, had forged my signature. "Does this change our plan?" I asked. "It strengthens our position, but no, the plan remains the same. We sell the house legally, properly, with all documentation in order. Let them discover the consequences of their actions when they're served with eviction notices from the new owner." That afternoon, I met Daniel Greenberg at a coffee shop downtown. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with an energy that suggested he was always calculating numbers in his head. He asked direct questions, made quick decisions, and offered a cash price for my house that was fair, if not generous. "I can close in 5 days, he said. "No inspections, no contingencies, as is condition. You'd need to guarantee vacant possession within 30 days of closing. The current occupants will need to be evicted," I said, keeping my voice steady. "They're there without my permission." Daniel nodded, unsurprised. "My attorney can handle that. It's not uncommon in investment properties." Not uncommon. As if it was normal for a mother to evict her own son from a house she didn't know she owned. As if any of this was normal. I signed the preliminary agreement that afternoon. 5 days. In 5 days, the house would no longer be mine, and I would no longer pretend that any of us were family. I spent the weekend verifying what I already knew. Everything they touched left a mark. I started with the forged deed. I cross-referenced the notary listed on the form, Claudia Jenkins, and looked her up through the state registry. Patricia was right. There was no such notary, not in this county, not in the next one either. Just a fake stamp and a name they hoped no one would check. It was sloppy, and I expected better from Christopher, but maybe desperation makes people careless. Next, I went through my bank account again, this time with a magnifying glass and a forensic accountant's eye. The $25,000 transfer to Robert Wright was just the beginning. I found smaller withdrawals, too. 500 here, 1,000 there. All authorized through online banking from IP addresses associated with Christopher and Julia's home network. In total, they'd taken nearly $40,000 over the past year. Money I hadn't even noticed was missing because I trusted them. Because I thought we were family. The bank confirmed what I already suspected. The logins had occurred from devices I didn't own, at times when I wasn't home. They had my passwords. They had access to everything. I spent hours changing every password, setting up new accounts, moving funds to secure locations. I documented every unauthorized transaction, created spreadsheets tracking dates, amounts, and destinations. I built a case so solid it would take a sledgehammer to crack it. Then came the email that confirmed my worst fears. Not from Christopher this time, but from a real estate agent. "Looking forward to our walkthrough Tuesday. Please confirm seller authority is fully in place. We'll bring standard listing paperwork." Attached was a staging schedule complete with interior photos. My furniture, my art, the grandfather clock that had once belonged to Richard's father, my house being packaged and sold like it had always belonged to them. I printed every file, every transfer, every forged document, every email that proved they weren't just pushing me out. They were trying to erase my name altogether, quietly, permanently. But now I had their trail, and like any good accountant, I knew exactly where every number pointed. I thought about Richard often during those days. We'd met in college. He was studying engineering. I was in business. We'd built a life of careful planning, modest ambitions, and deep, abiding love. When he died, I thought I'd lost my anchor in the world. What would he think of all this? Of Christopher's betrayal? Of my response? Richard had always been the gentler one, quick to forgive, slow to anger. But he'd also been unflinchingly honest. "Do what's right, Tess," he'd say, "not what's easy." This wasn't easy. None of it was easy. But I knew it was right. The night before the closing, I sat alone in my Kaufman Street apartment, a cup of tea growing cold beside me. I'd done everything necessary. The paperwork was ready, the wire transfers prepared, the legal documents drafted. Tomorrow I would sign the final papers. The house would be sold. My son would be evicted. The weight of it pressed against my chest like a stone. I pulled out an old photo album, one of the few things I'd rescued before I left. Inside was a picture of us on the back patio before the renovation. Rusted furniture, cracked tiles, and Christopher grilling in a t-shirt that read "World's Best Son." Julia was smiling genuinely, her arm looped through mine like we were family. Tyler and Emma were still babies then, their faces smeared with ice cream. I hadn't cried when they left the note. I hadn't cried when they changed the locks. I hadn't cried when I discovered the forged deed. But I cried over that photo because in it, I believed they loved me. The doorbell rang, startling me from my memories. A delivery, dinner from the cafe down the street. I hadn't ordered it. Inside the bag was a handwritten note from Patricia. "Sometimes reclaiming yourself costs more than it should. Still worth it." I ate alone quietly, carefully. I was winning. But grief doesn't care about legal victories. Grief sits at your dinner table and reminds you of what you lost, even when you chose to let it go. By Friday morning, the documents were finalized, the funds placed in escrow, and the closing date locked in for Monday at noon. The house would no longer be mine, and I would no longer pretend that any of us were family. But there was still one thing left to do. Michael mentioned that Julia had planned some kind of reception on Sunday, a garden lunch for her parents. "You might want to avoid the neighborhood that day," he'd said, not unkindly. I nodded, but my mind had already started reshaping the timing. That would be the day, not Monday. Sunday. We moved quickly. Michael contacted Daniel Greenberg's attorney and they agreed to conduct a pre-possession walkthrough Sunday afternoon. A quiet visit, legal counsel present, documents in hand. All we needed was access to the property. Patricia handled that. She filed for a police standby, a civil standby order scheduled precisely during the walkthrough window. The forged deed, the fake notary, the wire transfer to Julia's father, all documented, filed, and copied to the local precinct. The officer assigned would come only as a witness to ensure a peaceful process. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep it lawful. I wanted it that way. I didn't want a scene. I wanted something better. I wanted truth to arrive like a train at a station. On time. Undeniable. Unstoppable. "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked when we finalized the plans. We could wait until after their party. Do this more privately. I shook my head. They planned to sell my house without telling me. They forged my signature. They stole from my accounts. They don't deserve privacy. Patricia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Your choice. But remember, they're still your family. Whatever happens tomorrow can't be undone. They stopped being my family when they locked me out, I said quietly. Everything after that was just business. But that night, alone in my apartment, doubts crept in. Was I doing the right thing? Was public humiliation necessary? What about Tyler and Emma? How would they feel seeing their parents exposed? I called Patricia at midnight, my voice shaking. I'm having second thoughts. That's normal, she said, sounding unsurprised. What specifically is bothering you? The children. They shouldn't see this. Then suggest we reschedule for Monday when they're at school. I considered this. Monday would be cleaner, less dramatic. The children would be spared the scene. Christopher and Julia would still face consequences, just not in front of an audience. But then I remembered Julia's note. No room anymore. The casual cruelty of it. The assumption that I would simply disappear. I remembered the forged signature, the stolen funds, the plans to sell what was mine. They had shown no concern for my dignity. Why should I protect theirs? No, I said finally. Sunday as planned. The morning of the confrontation dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect early autumn day that feels like a gift. I dressed carefully. A navy suit I'd bought for Richard's funeral but never worn, pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, sensible shoes that wouldn't make noise on hardwood floors. I looked nothing like the woman who had quietly packed a suitcase weeks ago. I looked like someone who still had everything, because I did. As I prepared to leave, I opened the wooden box where Richard's watch used to sit and placed the original deed inside. Not a copy, the real one, signed, sealed, untouched by forgery. The document that proved beyond any doubt that 1418 Oakwood Drive belonged to me and me alone. Patricia picked me up at 10:30, her expression calm but focused. Last chance to back out, she said as I buckled my seatbelt. I shook my head. Let's go. We drove in silence, each turn bringing us closer to the confrontation I'd been preparing for since finding Julia's note. As we approached Oakwood Drive, I could see cars lining the street, expensive sedans and SUVs parked in front of my house. Julia's party was in full swing. Michael was waiting at the corner, standing beside Daniel Greenberg and his attorney. They nodded in greeting, said nothing. Then the patrol car pulled in behind us. No lights, no drama. Just two officers, one with a clipboard, the other with a camera. The weight of what was about to happen settled over me like a heavy coat. This was it. The moment when truth would arrive, uninvited but impossible to ignore. Ready? Patricia asked. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and nodded. Ready. Together we walked up the path to what had once been my home, where my son and his wife were about to learn that some betrayals come with a price too high to pay. The sun was high when I pulled up in front of the house I had bought, paid for, protected, and been locked out of. The driveway was full of luxury sedans, a catering van parked at the curb, and folding chairs being unloaded onto the lawn. Julia had spared no expense for her garden party. I stepped out of Patricia's car in my navy suit, hair neatly pinned, my mother's pearl earrings the only jewelry I wore. I looked nothing like the woman who had quietly packed a suitcase weeks ago. I looked like someone who still had everything, because I did. Michael Harrison arrived seconds later with Daniel Greenberg and his attorney. They nodded, said nothing. Then the patrol car pulled in behind us. No lights, no drama, just two officers, one with a clipboard, the other with a camera. Julia was on the porch when she saw us coming. Her laugh faded mid-sentence. Her smile dropped so fast it almost looked like pain. "What's going on?" she called out, stepping forward, hands already fluttering toward her necklace, a nervous habit I'd noticed years ago. "Teresa?" I heard Christopher's voice from inside the house. "Mom?" "You can't just—" Julia began. "I can," I said. Daniel's attorney stepped forward, holding a folder thick with signed documents. Michael unrolled the purchase contract, highlighting the deed transfer, closing date, and legal sale terms. Patricia handed the officer a packet, the notarized affidavit, the forged deed comparison, the wire fraud record, and the voice recording transcript. Julia's parents stood nearby, frozen. Her mother Eleanor reached for her wine glass but didn't drink. Her father Robert's expression darkened with dawning shame. Then Christopher appeared in the doorway, glass in hand, confusion written all over his face. "Mom?" he said, blinking like he couldn't process the sight of me standing there with lawyers and police. What are you doing here?" I turned slowly. "What I should have done the day you changed the locks." One of the officers gestured toward the paperwork. "Per our review, this property has been sold. The current occupants were never legal owners. You have 10 days to vacate under Code 32119. Julia's voice cracked as she tried to speak. Christopher just stared, lips parted, disbelief painted across his face like a bruise. The guests began to retreat, first confused, then embarrassed. Some mumbled quick goodbyes. Others simply walked to their cars without a word. Julia's parents turned away without speaking to their daughter. No one screamed. No one defended them. They just watched as the house was handed back to the woman who never lost it. We stood in a semicircle on the front lawn while the officers reviewed the documentation again. Julia clung to Christopher's arm now, whispering furiously, her voice too low to catch but full of panic. The developer's lawyer unfolded the forged deed and placed it side by side with the original. Even from a distance, the signature mismatch was obvious. Sloppy, rushed. Mine in name only. Patricia leaned over and handed one of the officers a flash drive. "Voice recording," she said. "Dated 3 weeks ago. Julia Bailey on a call with her mother discussing how to transfer the house paperwork behind Teresa's back. She used the words, 'She won't even know.'" The officer nodded and pocketed the drive. "That'll go in the file." Michael added a folder to the growing stack. "Itemized record of payments. All utilities, mortgage, taxes paid by Mrs. Bailey. No evidence of shared ownership, no lease agreements, no formal tenancy. This was never their house." Christopher stepped forward finally, trying to steady his voice. "Okay, this has gotten out of hand. We were under the impression she was gifting us the property." "Then why forge her name?" Patricia asked, her voice calm but cutting. "Why pay a non-existent notary to witness a deed that never existed?" Mark looked toward Julia, who stared at the grass like it might offer an escape. "And why did you transfer $25,000 to your father-in-law from my account?" I added. "Because I've got the bank's fraud report, Christopher. They traced the IP address. It came from your house." The second officer flipped the final page of the affidavit and gave a low whistle. "Well, this is a mess." "No," I said. "This is an ending." The guests had fully retreated now, their cars pulling away without goodbyes. Julia's parents were already gone. Her champagne table stood untouched, the linen cloth fluttering in the breeze like a white flag that came too late. "Effective today," the attorney said, handing them a formal notice. "You have 10 days to vacate the premises. This order is binding and enforceable." Julia finally looked up, her voice trembling. "You can't do this." I met her eyes. "Oh, I just did." The police left first. No sirens, no raised voices, just signatures on the notice and quiet footsteps across the porch. Julia stood motionless, clutching her phone like it could protect her. Her parents had already driven off. No hugs, no explanations, just quiet retreat. Christopher kept rereading the paper in his hands like he still thought the words might change if he stared long enough. 10 days. Vacate or face court order. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer anything. Patricia and Michael stayed behind while Daniel's attorney packed up the contracts. I nodded at him, then turned toward the house and said simply, "Let's go inside." Patricia followed me in. Christopher and Julia didn't try to stop us. They had no right to. The house was still mine, legally, fully, finally, and I intended to walk it one last time before the sale closed. Inside it smelled like catered food and fresh flowers. A table was set in the dining room, untouched. Linen napkins, wine glasses, dessert plates stacked like they were expecting applause. I moved past all of it. In the hallway, I paused at the framed photo Julia had chosen to keep on display. Our family at the lake, the same photo I had packed into my suitcase weeks ago. I looked at the copy she'd printed, straightened it with one finger, and left it crooked. Upstairs, the guest room, my room, had been cleared out, but I saw the indentation in the carpet where my rocker used to sit. The dent was still there, the only remaining evidence that I had ever lived in this house at all. By the time we came back down, the others were gone. Just Patricia and me standing in the entryway of a house that had once been filled with promises. "You did it," she said quietly. "No," I said. "They did. I just finished it." We stepped outside, locked the door, and walked past Julia without speaking. She didn't move. She didn't meet my eyes. That was the first moment I felt it. Not revenge, not relief, but something cleaner. Power returned to the person who never should have lost it. It didn't take long for the story to spread. I hadn't told a soul, but stories like this, the kind no one wants to say out loud, but everyone wants to whisper, don't need a press release. By Wednesday, I got a call from Nancy Wilson, the neighbor 2 doors down. We'd exchanged Christmas cookies for years, even after I moved out. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. "All I'll say," she murmured, "is people are talking, and not kindly." The headline was never mine to control. It was "Son kicks mother out of her own house, loses it in legal mess." I didn't write it, but it found its way into every church gathering, book club, and PTA circle. Julia was the first to feel it. She was quietly removed from the church event committee she used to run like a CEO. No one said it was because of me. They didn't have to. A new mom was voted in within the week. Christopher lasted a little longer, but I got a message from Sarah Thompson, the director of the charity board I helped him join 3 years ago. "Out of respect," she wrote, "we've asked Christopher to step down from his leadership role. We wish him the best, but Teresa, people are disappointed. That's all I'll say." Disappointed was generous. Some people, especially the ones who never liked Julia's clipped tone or Christopher's easy excuses, seemed almost relieved, like they'd been waiting for someone else to see what they'd sensed all along. I wasn't proud of their downfall, but I didn't feel sorry either. Choices echo, and theirs were loud. I stayed silent. No interviews, no explanations. I let the truth do its slow, deliberate work. The kind that doesn't knock on your door, just seeps in through the walls until there's no room left to pretend. 3 days after the confrontation, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Tyler, using Dad's phone. Are you okay, Grandma?" My heart clenched at the sight of my grandson's name. He was 8 years old, too young to understand what had happened, but old enough to feel the aftershocks. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I wrote back. "How are you?" "Dad and Mom are fighting a lot. Is that because of you?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The truth was too complicated for a child his age, but lies wouldn't serve him either. "Adults sometimes disagree," I wrote finally. It's not your fault, and it's not something you need to worry about. I love you very much. Can I still see you? Tears welled in my eyes. Of course, I would love that. Dad says maybe next week. He's really sad. I didn't reply immediately. Christopher was sad? Good. He should be. He should feel the full weight of what he'd done, but he was still my son, and Tyler was still my grandson. The anger that had propelled me through the confrontation began to soften at the edges, not disappearing but changing shape. That evening my phone rang. Christopher. I let it go to voicemail. Mom. His voice sounded tired, deflated. I know you probably don't want to talk to me right now. I understand that. But we need to figure out logistics for the kids. They miss you. Call me back when you can. I didn't. The next day, Patricia called with an update. The forensic accountant finished reviewing your bank records. The unauthorized transfers totaled just over $38,000 over the past year. Most went to Robert Wright, but there were smaller amounts to accounts we haven't identified yet. We have enough for criminal charges if you want to pursue that route. What would happen to Christopher and Julia? Fraud over $10,000 is a felony. They could face jail time, especially given the forgery. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine my son in handcuffs, my grandchildren visiting their father in prison. The scandal splashed across the local news. Let's hold off on that for now, I said. I want to see what they do next. What they did next surprised me. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Eleanor Wright, Julia's mother. She was in the produce section, examining tomatoes with unusual intensity. When she looked up and saw me, her face flushed red. Teresa, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't expect to see you. I nodded coolly. Eleanor. She glanced around, then stepped closer. I want you to know that Robert and I had no idea what Julia was planning. The money, that $25,000, Robert told me it was a loan from Christopher. He didn't know it came from your account. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything from you. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. But it's the truth. Robert and Julia have always been too close. He enables her worst tendencies. When we found out what they'd done, Robert and Christopher had a terrible fight. They're both blaming each other now. And Julia? Eleanor's expression hardened. Julia blames everyone but herself, always has. She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a check. This is the money Robert received. I made him write it. It doesn't fix anything, I know that, but... She held it out to me. I stared at the check for a long moment before taking it. $25,000, a partial repayment of what they'd stolen. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Thank you, I said simply. Eleanor nodded, then turned to go. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm ashamed of what my daughter did to you. Mothers deserve better. I watched her walk away, wondering if Julia knew what her mother had done. Wondering if this small act of restitution would drive another wedge between them, fracturing their family as mine had been fractured. Later that day, I visited Patricia's office to give her the check. Interesting development, she said, examining it. But this only covers part of what they took. I know, but it's a start. A start toward what exactly? Forgiveness? I shook my head. I don't know yet, but it feels like something is shifting. That evening, I returned to my apartment to find a small package outside my door. Inside was the mug Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary, the one Julia had tried to donate. Wrapped around it was a note in Christopher's handwriting. This was never mine to give away. I'm sorry, Mom. I held the mug in my hands, running my thumb over the familiar chip on the handle. It wasn't enough. A mug couldn't erase what they'd done. But like the check, it was something. A crack in the narrative they'd built. A small acknowledgement of wrong. I placed the mug on my kitchen counter and made a cup of tea. As I sipped from it, the first time since I'd left their house, I realized something important. Justice didn't have to mean destruction. It could also mean rebuilding, but on new terms. My terms. The sale would proceed as planned. The house would be sold. But perhaps something else could be salvaged from the wreckage of our family. The formal fraud reports were filed with the state the following Monday. The forged deed, the fake notary, the wire transfers to Robert Wright. All of it logged and backed by documentation. These aren't just civil issues, Patricia reminded me as she finalized the paperwork. This is real estate fraud, wire fraud, identity falsification. That bank report alone could carry weight. I nodded, watching her efficient movements as she organized the documents into neat stacks. We'll submit these today, she added. It's not jail time, not yet, but it's enough to stain their names where it counts. I left with a copy of the filings tucked in my bag and a calm I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness. I wasn't sure I'd feel that again for a long time, but a steady, quiet certainty that I was doing what needed to be done. Back home, I closed the last joint bank account I'd once opened with Christopher's name on it. There wasn't much left. They drained it slowly, like people siphoning gas from a tank they thought I'd never miss. The account was shut down in under 10 minutes. I didn't call to tell them. The silence was the punishment, and the paper trail would handle the rest. Some losses aren't loud. Some victories don't need an audience. 3 days before the closing, Christopher called again. This time I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice ragged with relief or exhaustion. I couldn't tell which. "Thank you for picking up." I said nothing, waiting. "We're moving out tomorrow," he continued. "Found a small rental across town. It's not great, but it'll do until we figure things out." "The eviction notice gave you 10 days, I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You still had time." "What's the point in staying? It's not our house, it never was." He paused. "I keep thinking about how this happened, how we got here." "I know exactly how we got here, Christopher. You pushed me out of a house I owned. You forged my signature. You stole from me." "I know." His voice broke. "I know what we did, what I did. There's no excuse." "Then why did you do it?" He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice hollow. "Julia's gambling debts. They kept growing. The renovation put us underwater. Then you moved in and it was supposed to help, but Julia couldn't stand it. She felt watched, judged. So you decided to steal from me instead?" "No, yes. I don't know." He sighed heavily. "It started small. A little money here and there to cover emergencies. Then Julia found out the house was in your name and she convinced me it wasn't fair. That you owed us." "Owed you?" I repeated, incredulous. "I gave you $180,000, Christopher. I cooked your meals. I took care of your children." I know that now." Another pause. "Robert's been calling, blaming me for everything. Says I manipulated him and Julia. The whole thing's falling apart, Mom." I should have felt satisfaction at that. Instead, I felt a profound weariness. "What do you want from me, Christopher?" "I don't know. Understanding, maybe? A chance to make it right?" "Some things can't be made right." "I know, but I have to try. For the kids, if nothing else. They miss you." There it was, the one wound that hadn't scabbed over. Tyler and Emma, my grandchildren, the innocent casualties of this war. "You can bring them to visit," I said finally. "Next weekend, here at my apartment." "Thank you." The relief in his voice was palpable. "And Julia?" "Not yet." "I understand." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, she's getting help." "For the gambling." and other things. Good, I said, meaning it. Whatever happened between us, Julia needed help. For her sake, for the children's sake, for everyone. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. The conversation replayed in my mind, each word a pebble dropping into still water, ripples expanding outward. Christopher was trying to make amends. It wasn't enough, might never be enough, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps, or at least not an ending. The next day I drove past the house one last time. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, men carrying furniture out the front door. Christopher stood on the lawn, directing the process. Julia was nowhere to be seen. I didn't stop, didn't roll down my window, just drove past slowly, watching a chapter of my life being packed into cardboard boxes and loaded onto a truck. Let them go. Let it all go. At home, I received an email from Daniel Greenberg confirming our closing appointment for Monday morning. All paperwork is in order, he wrote. Just signatures and fund transfers remaining. I replied with a simple thank you and closed my laptop. In 3 days, the house would belong to someone else. The renovation I'd paid for would be torn apart to make duplexes. The garden I'd planted would likely be paved over for additional parking. And I found I didn't mind. It was just a house. The memories, good and bad, would remain regardless of who owned the property. That night I made a decision. I called Patricia. The fraud charges, I said when she answered. I don't want to pursue them criminally. Are you sure? She asked. We have a strong case. I'm sure. File civil claims for the money, but no criminal charges. I don't want Christopher to go to prison. May I ask why? I thought about Tyler's text message, about Emma's smile, about Christopher's broken voice on the phone. Because some punishments are worse than jail, I said. Living with what they did, that's enough. Patricia was quiet for a moment. It's your decision, Teresa. I'll adjust the filings first thing tomorrow. As I hung up, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. I wasn't forgiving Christopher and Julia. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I was choosing not to destroy them. I was choosing to leave room for something else. Something that wasn't quite reconciliation, but wasn't total severance either. A middle path. A way forward. The Saturday before the closing, Tyler and Emma came to visit. Christopher dropped them off, hovering awkwardly at the door of my apartment. I'll pick them up at 4, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I nodded, already being pulled into the living room by Emma, who wanted to show me her new doll. The children filled my small apartment with noise and life. Tyler showed me his progress in math. I'm the best in my class now, Grandma. While Emma drew pictures of unicorns and butterflies at the kitchen table. We baked cookies, we played board games, we pretended nothing had changed. But things had changed. Tyler was quieter than before, watching me with careful eyes, as if afraid I might disappear again. Emma asked twice when she could come back to the big house, not understanding why we were in this strange apartment instead. Do Mom and Dad still love each other? Tyler asked suddenly as we washed dishes together. The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask that? He shrugged, focused intently on drying a plate. They don't talk anymore. Not like before. And Dad sleeps in the guest room now. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups go through difficult times. It doesn't mean they don't love each other or you. Is it because of what they did to you? I nearly dropped the glass I was washing. What do you mean? I heard Dad telling Uncle Mike that they did something really bad to you. That's why we had to move to the small house. Out of the mouths of babes. I turned off the water and dried my hands, then knelt to look Tyler in the eye. Your dad and I are working through some adult problems, but none of that changes how much we both love you and Emma. Do you understand? He nodded solemnly. Are you still mad at him? I'm disappointed in some choices he made, but we're talking about it. That's what he says when I do something bad, that he's disappointed. I smiled despite myself. Well, sometimes parents and children disappoint each other. That's part of being family. He seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to drying dishes. But his words stayed with me long after Christopher picked them up, promising to bring them again next weekend. Family. Were we still that? Could we be again after everything? The next morning, the day before the closing, Christopher called again. The kids had a great time yesterday, he said. They haven't stopped talking about it. I enjoyed it too. They're welcome any time. He hesitated. I was hoping maybe we could talk, in person. I closed my eyes, considering. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep the distance between us, the protection it offered. But another part, the part that had raised him, loved him, forgiven countless smaller transgressions over the years, wanted to hear what he had to say. All right, I said finally. This afternoon, the coffee shop on Main Street. Thank you, Mom. The coffee shop was neutral territory, public enough that we couldn't make a scene, private enough that we could speak honestly. I arrived early, choosing a table near the back, away from the windows. Christopher arrived precisely on time, looking thinner than I remembered, shadows under his eyes. You look tired, I said as he sat down across from me. I'm not sleeping well. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The rental has thin walls, and other things. I nodded, not offering sympathy. Why did you want to meet? He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, staring into it like it held answers. I wanted to apologize, face to face, for everything. I'm listening. He took a deep breath. What we did, what I did, was unforgivable. I betrayed you in every way possible. I let Julia convince me that you owed us more than you'd already given. I let my financial problems cloud my judgment. I let my pride stop me from asking for help directly. Why didn't you just ask me for help? I said quietly. I would have helped you, Christopher. You know that. I was ashamed. He looked up finally, meeting my eyes. The gambling, the debt, the failed investments. I couldn't admit to you how badly I'd messed up. It was easier to take than to ask. Easier to lock me out of my own house? To forge my signature? To steal from me? He flinched. No, none of it was easy. It was like drowning. Each decision pulling me further down until I couldn't see a way back up. And Julia? His expression hardened slightly. She's staying with her sister in Florida, for now at least. We're, taking some time apart. I see. She still blames me, you know. Says I should have protected her from her father's influence. Says I knew what the money was for and agreed to it. And did you? He shook his head. Not at first. By the time I figured out what was happening, we were in too deep. Robert had taken most of it for his own debts. Julia had spent the rest. There was no way to pay it back. So you decided to sell my house instead? Yes. The word fell between us like a stone. It seemed like the only way out. We were desperate. I sipped my tea, letting the silence stretch. Around us, the coffee shop hummed with normal life. Students studying, friends chatting, baristas calling out orders. A world untouched by our private catastrophe. What happens now? He asked finally. The house closes tomorrow. I'll receive the funds, pay off the remaining mortgage, and move on. And us? Our family? I set down my cup carefully. I don't know, Christopher. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. I know that, but I want to try. For the kids. For us. It will take time. I have time. He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not yet. Just a chance to prove I can be better, that I can make amends. I studied his face, the face I'd known from the moment he was born, the face that had looked up at me with complete trust as a child, the face that now showed the weight of his mistakes. The children can visit every weekend, I said finally. You can come with them. We'll start there. Relief flooded his features. Thank you, Mom. Don't thank me yet. This isn't forgiveness. This is a beginning. The rest depends on you. As we parted outside the coffee shop, Christopher hesitated, then asked, Will you let me know? After the closing tomorrow? I nodded. I will. He smiled, a small, sad smile, but genuine. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Christopher. I watched him walk away, shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived, as if our conversation had lightened some invisible burden. I wasn't ready to forgive. Wasn't sure I ever would be. But I was ready to try something else, something that might, with time and work, lead us back to family. Not the family we were, but something new. Something built on clearer boundaries and harder truths. Something real. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect fall day that makes you believe in new beginnings. I dressed carefully for the closing. A cream blouse, charcoal slacks, low heels. Professional, dignified, ready. Patricia picked me up at 9, her briefcase filled with the documents we'd review one final time before signing. Nervous? She asked as we drove to the title company's office. No, I said, surprised to find it true. Ready. The closing room was bland and corporate. Beige walls, a long table, uncomfortable chairs. Daniel Greenberg was already there, along with his attorney and the title agent. Michael arrived moments later, carrying a folder of final inspection reports. Everything's in order, the title agent said after reviewing the paperwork. Just need signatures and the wire transfer will be processed immediately. I signed where indicated, my real signature flowing across each line with certainty. With each page I felt lighter, as if signing away the house was also signing away the hurt, the betrayal, the months of confusion and pain. When the final document was signed, the title agent smiled. Congratulations, Mrs. Bailey. The sale is complete. Daniel shook my hand. Thank you for a smooth transaction. We'll begin the duplex conversion next month. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It was done. The house was no longer mine. The chapter was closed. Outside, standing in the parking lot, Patricia handed me a copy of the closing documents. Well, that's that. The wire transfer should hit your account by this afternoon. Thank you, I said, meaning it. For everything. Just doing my job, she smiled. What will you do now? I looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling the gentle autumn breeze against my face. Live, I said simply. Just live. Back at my apartment, I called Christopher as promised. It's done, I said when he answered. The house is sold. He was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? Free, I said, surprising myself with the answer. Like I can breathe again. I'm glad, he said softly. You deserve that. We talked for a few more minutes about the children, about his job search, about small, normal things that families discuss. Not quite healing, but not bleeding either. After we hung up, I sat on my small balcony, watching the world go by below. People walking dogs, carrying groceries, living their lives. I'd been so afraid of being alone after Richard died, so afraid of the silence and the emptiness that I'd given away pieces of myself to avoid it. But sitting there, I realized something important. Being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I had my apartment. I had my dignity. I had my grandchildren on weekends. I had a future I could shape on my own terms. The wire transfer came through at 3 o'clock. After paying off the remaining mortgage and setting aside money for taxes, I had enough left to be comfortable for years to come. Enough to consider what I wanted next. And what I wanted, I realized, was a fresh start. 2 weeks later, I toured a small house in a nearby retirement community, a place with activities, security, and people my own age. It wasn't grand, but it had a garden plot, a sunny kitchen, and room for the grandchildren to visit. "It's perfect," I told the agent. "I'll take it." I moved in the following month. Christopher and the children helped, carrying boxes and arranging furniture. Julia remained in Florida, but sent a card, a simple good luck in your new home, with no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. I didn't expect more. Some bridges stay burned. The day after I moved in, Nancy Wilson, my old neighbor, stopped by with a housewarming gift, a teapot and matching cups. "The neighborhood's not the same without you," she said. "Those kids of yours visit yet?" "This weekend," I said, smiling. "Christopher's bringing them for a sleepover." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Family should stick together, even when it's hard." "Even when it's hard," I echoed. After she left, I walked through my new home, touching each surface, each piece of furniture I'd chosen myself. In the kitchen, I arranged my tea canisters on a shelf I could reach without a step stool. In the living room, I hung family photos, including a new one of Tyler and Emma taken at the park last weekend. In the bedroom, I placed Richard's watch on the nightstand, next to a photo of us on our 40th anniversary. "I did it," I whispered to his image. I stood up for myself. I could almost hear his reply. "I never doubted you would, Tess." That night I sat on my new porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp with autumn, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Justice didn't arrive with sirens. It came quietly, in signed papers and wire transfers, in boundaries established and respected, in the steady rebuilding of what had been broken. I hadn't lost everything after all. I'd found something more valuable: my voice, my strength, my self-worth. Some people might call my story a tragedy, a mother betrayed by her son, a family fractured by greed. But I choose to see it differently, not as an ending, but as a beginning, a reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your power, your dignity, your life. Even when a sticky note says there's no more room for you, you can make your own room, create your own space, write your own ending. And mine was just beginning. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know which city you're watching from. And don't forget to check out these 2 other stories that are channel favorites.